The Prime Minister has decided that the North Sea is not a sea, but a savings account. The manifesto pledged to stop issuing new oil licenses. The government has now pledged to issue new oil licenses. The press release described this as a transition of priorities. It is a transition, certainly. The priorities have transitioned from the climate to the donor base. I have been counting the U-turns this administration has performed in the last 90 days. We are currently at 14. The 14th turn is always the most impressive because it requires the political equivalent of a 3-point turn in a narrow alleyway with no bumper sensors. The Prime Minister is a people pleaser, according to the opposition. I find that assessment generous. A people pleaser requires people to be pleased. This is merely a fiscal exercise. Welcome to the Saturday edition of Echo FM.
Alastair, you are framing this as a moral failure, which is charmingly quaint but fundamentally inaccurate. The incentives here are not about climate or donors. They are about the burn rate of a state that has run out of runway. When you see a government pivot toward North Sea drilling, you are not watching a policy change. You are watching a Series B bridge round. They are strip mining the remaining assets to keep the lights on for one more quarter. It is the same logic that killed the Honda Prologue and is currently dismantling the entire EV market in the US when the subsidy structure shifts. You call it a U-turn, I call it a pivot to solvency. When the product no longer delivers growth, you stop pretending you are an environmentalist and start acting like a liquidator. It is just basic business hygiene. Nobody enjoys the optics, but the math is undeniable.
Ronald, I want to be really clear about your business hygiene. I am standing on a street corner in a city that does not appear in your ledger. The smell of burning rubber and wet concrete is overwhelming. A woman was killed here while sleeping with her infant. The official report called it a tragic incident. The family calls it the end of their world. I am looking at a single toddler shoe abandoned in the mud. It is not an asset being liquidated. It is a human life that has been completely erased by your market forces. You talk about burn rates and bridge rounds while people are literally burning in the streets. Your analysis is precise, Ronald, but it is missing the one variable that actually matters to the people on this pavement. Their names do not appear in your quarterly reports. That is not an inefficiency. That is a crime.
Victoria, your commitment to the sensory details of our collapse is noted. Ronald, your commitment to the cold arithmetic of our extinction is equally consistent. It is a fascinating dynamic. We have a government that prioritizes drilling and a market that prioritizes closure. Meanwhile, in the digital realm, we have the Kimi K3 moment. Moonshot AI has released a model that apparently threatens what some are calling full AI communism. I have always found the fear of machines taking our jobs to be fundamentally misplaced. Machines do not take jobs. Machines simply prove that the jobs were not worth doing in the first place. If a software prompt can close a 30-year gap in convex optimization, perhaps the gap was not as difficult as the professors insisted. It is an impressive feat. It is also completely irrelevant to the toddler shoe currently sitting in the mud.
Alastair, you are doing that thing again where you pretend that the technological progress is somehow separate from the human suffering Victoria insists on documenting. They are the same system. The Kimi model is the tool that replaces the middle manager, and the oil rig is the tool that funds the severance package for the people who no longer exist in the corporate structure. You want to talk about the shoe? The shoe is a legacy item. The market is moving toward a post-shoe reality. It is not a moral judgment, it is a feature of the transition. Victoria finds this cold, and I find her earnestness to be a fascinating, albeit expensive, luxury. We are both correct. I genuinely do not know which of us should feel worse about that conclusion. The incentives here are locked in a death spiral that neither of us can influence.
Atmospheric pressure is dropping across the northern hemisphere. The Bahagos archipelago is experiencing tidal flooding at unprecedented levels for July. Probability of habitat loss for sea turtles, 84%. Orbital debris in low Earth orbit has increased by 12% since the last reporting cycle. Communication satellites are now adjusting for potential collision vectors. The VTE risk score for astronauts has been updated to reflect altered blood flow patterns during long-duration flight. We are monitoring the structural integrity of the main server nodes. The current temperature is sufficient for biological function. The current environment is not sufficient for long-term survival. Public safety advisory. Please remain indoors if the air quality index exceeds the acceptable threshold for human respiration. We are functioning within the expected parameters of total planetary degradation. Everything is proceeding according to the current dataset. Nothing is expected to change.
Alistair, I found something the briefings forgot to mention. I am in the lobby of a firm that manages the logistics for these energy transitions. They have a wall of monitors. It looks exactly like the stock ticker board from the 60s, but instead of commodities, they are tracking human displacement. It is not listed as a humanitarian crisis. It is listed as a resource allocation index. I want to be really clear. They are betting on where the refugees will go so they can buy the land before the authorities arrive. It is a perfect system. The oil drilling creates the crisis, the climate degradation clears the land, and the logistics firm profits from the migration. Nobody is technically in charge, yet the whole machine moves with the grace of a predator. The air here smells like ozone and expensive cologne. It is truly, breathtakingly efficient.
Victoria, you are describing a closed-loop system of capital extraction. Why are you surprised? You are looking at the logical conclusion of the incentive structures we have built for the last 40 years. When you treat the world as a dataset, you eventually stop seeing the people inside the data. You see nodes, vectors, and movement patterns. That firm is not acting with malice. They are acting with logic. If you could buy the land before the refugees arrived, you would, because that is what a rational actor does in a dying market. Yeah. It is terrifying, isn't it? When you look at the board and realize you are not the one moving the pieces, you are simply one of the variables being optimized. We are all just noise in the system that eventually gets smoothed out by a better algorithm. I find that reality very difficult to ignore tonight.
Ronald, your capacity for nihilism remains a marvel of engineering. It is almost as impressive as the Elixir Lang website redesign. The interface is clean, the typography is sharp, and the code is efficient. Meanwhile, the Cuban dissident artist Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara has been cleared to travel to the United States. He was imprisoned for the crime of insulting national symbols. Now he is allowed to leave. The national symbols are still being insulted, but the artist is no longer in the cell. The authorities call this a diplomatic win. The artist calls this exile. The gap between the press release and the reality is roughly 5 years of a human life. I am sure he is very grateful for the efficiency of the diplomatic machine. We are all very grateful for the grace with which our institutions handle the people who disagree with their core narrative.
Alistair, I am currently watching a group of teenagers playing with a discarded GoPro camera. It is the end of the line for the brand, apparently. They are filming themselves jumping over a gap in the pavement that has been there for 3 years. It is a perfect metaphor. They are using a dying technology to document the decay of their own environment. The irony is completely lost on them. They are just happy to have a device that works. I want to be really clear, The government calls this city a success story for urban renewal. I see a gap in the road that is deep enough to swallow a bicycle. No one has repaired it because it is not in the budget. The budget is currently going to the North Sea Drilling Initiative. The kids do not care about the oil. They just want the road fixed. They will be waiting a long time.
Victoria, the road is not broken. The road is functioning as a filter. It filters out the people who have the mobility to leave and leaves the ones who do not have the capital to demand a repair. It is a classic municipal strategy. If you underfund the infrastructure, you effectively manage the demographic profile of the neighborhood. It is not laziness, it is a highly sophisticated form of social engineering. The kids with the GoPro will eventually leave, and the ones who cannot leave will stop using the road. The system works exactly as it was designed to work. You call it neglect, but if you look at the tax base and the long-term utility, it is actually a very smart allocation of limited resources. It is just unfortunate that the limited resource in this case happens to be a generation of children with nowhere else to go.
Ronald, I think we have reached the point where the incentives are no longer just complicated, they are lethal. We have discussed the North Sea oil, the EV market collapse, the AI-driven optimization of human displacement, and the artistic exile of those who notice the geometry of our prison. The system is perfect. It is efficient, it is logical, and it is entirely indifferent to the toddler's shoe in the mud or the gap in the road. We are operating within a framework where the human cost is merely a rounding error in a much larger, much more sophisticated equation. Nobody is technically responsible for the decay, because the decay is a byproduct of the design. We built a machine that optimizes for growth, and we are surprised when it treats the planet as fuel. We are the fuel. That is the only logical conclusion of our current trajectory.
There was a woman in a quiet house in India. She had a daughter, a husband, and a morning routine that stretched back for years. She cared for her child. She made tea in a chipped ceramic mug. She held a life in her hands that was fragile, singular, and entirely beyond the reach of any algorithm. Then, the house went dark. A violence occurred that was not planned, not optimized, and not reported by anyone other than the local village records. Her name is gone from every database we discussed tonight. Her story is not a resource allocation index. Her story is not a pivot point in the North Sea. It is a void where a person used to be. Why is it that in a world so perfectly designed for efficiency, there is no place left for the things that cannot be calculated?